Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. Today, Bryce Simon is in the building. If you're watching on YouTube, we've got some new branding. We've got some new backgrounds. We got some things going on. We look bigger in screen. Shout out the new producer we got working on the show, Dave Krapinski. We're excited to be here. We're great and excited to talk NBA trade deadline. Bryce, what's going on, buddy?
Oh man, it was a crazy day, Sam. My wife texted me at one point. She's like, "Man, I'm sorry, babe. Like I'm really busy at work, whatever." I was like, "Trust me, it's all good. If there was a day for you not to be able to talk to me, this is the right day because I'm not gonna be able to talk to you." And I think I told you, like, I gave her a heads up about Thursday. I said, "Listen, especially if the Pistons do what the Pistons ended up doing, because I'm doing all of that on top of it." And so, but hey, it gives us content to talk about. We have a ton of trades and ideas and all of that to discuss. So it's good for us.
It's going to be great. I'm really excited to dive in and talk about all of these trades. It was a weird trade deadline, which we all kind of expected. I think Bryce and I tried to clue you guys in a little bit on Monday when we recorded, just to say this thing's going kind of slow right now. And that was the case throughout the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday portion of the week. And in the end, it ended up being kind of a flurry of moves here on Thursday. And the reason for that is that it felt like some teams were waiting for certain dominoes to fall, and some of those dominoes ended up happening. Some of them didn't. I think we'll especially focus maybe in like the second segment of the show on the dominoes that didn't fall, because those are the really important ones, I think, to take a look at. Just fascinating that the Lakers, the Warriors, the Hawks, the Magic, the Bulls, like teams like that ended up doing nothing. And then we have some other teams that were surprisingly involved, like Toronto and teams like that we'll dive into as well. But I just want to start with this very brief question, and it probably will not turn into a brief answer. Who was the best player traded at the 2024 NBA trade deadline? So removing Pascal Siakam, removing OG Anunoby, removing Terry Rozier, who was the best player traded this week at the 2024 NBA trade deadline?
So I have the notes, right? So I know what your answer is going to be, and I don't want to take your answer because
No, go ahead.
it was. Listen, you put that name in the sheet or in the doc, and I was like, that can't be right. Somebody better than that had to have been traded. And so I went through the list. I'm like, I can't find the name. So then I even tried to find, okay, who's going to be more impactful to the playoffs or the championship race or whatever. And I'm like, I think that trade is still the answer to that question potentially. So I think we probably have to start with this with Bojan Bogdanovic.
I think that's right. I think Bojan is the best player that was traded. I think that Quentin Grimes for me was probably the best like player asset that was moved at the deadline. I'll have to like really dive into some of those picks, like the 2027 Dallas pick that's only top 2 protected. Like that might end up being quite valuable. Some of these other picks I don't think were quite as valuable that were moved, but particularly when we're talking about players that were moved, I think Quentin Grimes, if I had to pick like an asset at the deadline that I think had the most value, it was probably Quentin Grimes. If I had to pick a player that I think is especially going to impact the playoff race the most, I think it is probably Bojan, because Bojan, is a terrific player still at 34 years old, who can really shoot the ball, can be kind of a bully ball mismatch 4, who can take guys down onto the block, into the mid post, create shots that way. And look, you can talk a little bit more substantially about Bojan's defense than I can. You've watched him even more this year than I have. I think he can at least hold up physically in a lot of situations in the playoffs. He's not a great movement defender anymore. He doesn't have great mobility necessarily, and never did. But the Pacers used to use him fairly regularly in their playoff runs on high-end creators, because he's just a big body that's strong and physical and can hold up in those situations. That strength remains, even if the mobility and the ability to take on tough matchups because of it has fallen off a little bit. What has been your take on Bojan this year? And then after that, I'll kind of talk about why I love the Knicks fit, I guess. But particularly, what is your thought on Bojan Bogdanovic?
Yeah, I mean, he's been a bucket. Like, he can really score the basketball. The defense, you've outlined it pretty well. I just have this feeling that we're going to see Boyan in New York playing underneath Tibbs, and all of a sudden we're going to see a guy that's a little bit more motivated to get in the right position and move his feet and be physical and those type of things. Here's the other thing, Sam. He was asked to essentially be the second option on Detroit, and a lot of nights, maybe even the first option offensively. Now he's going to New York where he's going to come off the bench, play how many, 20 some odd minutes. Yes, he's going to be the getter, in that unit, but there's going to be a lot more energy for Boy on a night in, night out basis to give that on the defensive end of the floor. And so I'm not saying he's going to all of a sudden be a stopper, but I think he can go from being, as YouTube user says, a traffic cone on the defensive end. Like, the defense was a mess in Detroit in general, didn't have a lot of structure and all of that. And so I think he'll be a little bit better, combined with the fact that he doesn't have the offensive usage, but I think I'm interested to see what you take. This makes a lot of sense to me for New York. Like, Boyan and Burks now coming off the bench for them replaces a lot of scoring that they lost whenever they traded away Emmanuel quickly.
See, that's exactly right for me. And at the end of the day, what it seemed like what was going to happen with the Knicks was they were going to move on from Quentin Grimes. Be it because, maybe Quentin wanted a more substantial role as he hits potential free agency extension time this summer, free agency restricted next summer. You would think that somebody like Grimes, who entered the NBA a little bit later, came out as a junior at Houston, doesn't quite have as many years to get those big contracts as some other players. This is his big chance to really get paid. And Quentin Grimes was fantastic last season. If you look at his advanced metrics, he was right around a league average starting shooting guard in his second season last year, because he can shoot and he can defend. And we'll talk about his fit in Detroit, I think, a little bit later, but I want to keep it focused a little bit on the Knicks right now. The Knicks really needed more offensive creation off of the bench in a big way. Like, they truly just did. They needed somebody who can come in and get shots and be able to create offense. And Bojan Bogdanovic can certainly do that. Alec Burks can really do that as a shooter, right? You look at the guys that the Knicks have just in their rotation right now: Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, all very confident three-point shooters. Julius's three-point percentage is down this year, obviously, but Brunson and Anunoby, I think we feel confident with them as shooters. Donte DiVincenzo has been on fire this year as a shooter. You would expect him to be able to continue that moving forward. But beyond that, you're looking at guys like Josh Hart, Isaiah Hartenstein, Precious Achua. There just aren't a crazy amount of shooters beyond those players at the end of the day. And now with Deuce McBride in the lineup, and I really, really love Deuce, and I think people know that Deuce has, made a ton of threes since he's been in the lineup. I'll be interested to see how long that holds up. He's always been a little bit of a low volume three-point shooter, even going back to his days at West Virginia. Can he consistently be that guy? And will he get guarded like that guy? Now with Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, you have two guys that defenses have to close out on. They absolutely have to close out on. Tom Thibodeau loves Josh Hart. He loves playing Josh Hart. He loves the energy and the rebounding and the overall effort that he gives defensively. In a playoff setting, teams are going to sag off of Josh Hart, and they're going to make it way, way, way more difficult and bogged down for guys like Julius Randle to get the post touches that he wants, for guys like OG Anunoby to cut back door on Isaiah Hartenstein, like high post passes, right? Getting somebody like Bojan or Alec Burks in this case, it really rounds out their lineup offensively to where you can just structure so many different combinations of these players that really make sense. You can play, Jalen with Donte DiVincenzo and Bojan and OG Anunoby and Hartenstein, and you can probably get away with that defensively because of how good Donte is on the ball and how good OG Anunoby and Hartenstein are. Look, the Knicks tend not to love to play small, but getting another bigger 3-4 hybrid guy in Bojan allows them to potentially go with lineups like Bojan at the 3, OG Anunoby at the 4, Julius Randle at the 5. Those lineups could be really effective playoff lineups. I think that more than anything, what the Knicks did here is they opened up a substantial amount of lineup versatility and flexibility for any kind of playoff matchup that they're going to get. And look, we'll see what happens if Jalen Brunson can carry the load in a playoff series. We'll see what happens if Julius Randle can figure out a way to like get enough space to make his like bully ballish game work in the way that the Knicks need in the playoffs from a shot creation perspective. But OG Anunoby and Bojan Bogdanovic, adding those two guys over the course of the last month and a half, two guys that are wings who can shoot the ball. Bojan's at least like competent defensively in terms of knowing where to rotate. OG Anunoby, certainly one of the best defenders in the NBA. Having those guys just opens up so many more options for Tom Thibodeau as they look toward potential playoff series.
Yeah, and what I think, well, I want to also say, like, Alec Burks hasn't been great defensively this year either. So, like, I know everybody wants to crush Bojan. I'd be interested to see if Burks gives a little bit more on that end in New York as well. But I think what it allows them to do in the regular season, one, it gives them depth to finish out this regular season run, Sam. Like, we just got the OG news. They've got to continue to win games here in the regular season to set themselves up for a playoff run where they can get as many home games and a higher seed and all of that as possible. And even when healthy, even in the regular season, I know you don't go 10 deep in most playoff games, but even that second unit makes sense to me. If you wanted to go straight second unit of McBride and Burks and Josh Hart and Bojan and Hartenstein, whenever Mitch Robb eventually does get back, or, you know, whatever, like McBride and Hart can take the defensive matchups, and then Burks and Bojan can really carry the offensive load along with mixing and matching and all of those things. And you're right. I think in the playoffs, that versatility and lineup matchups, all of that stuff, it really comes into play. And now you at least have some offensive options to throw out there when you have the defensive guys now that they do. I mean, I'll say this. Burks and Bojan are about to have more rim protection when fully healthy. This Knicks team fully, they will have more rim protection than they've had in Detroit. And, you know, I'm not trying to take a shot at Jalen Duren right now, but I mean, Detroit fans are going, when are we going to get some rim protection? And so they have that behind them now where they didn't have that in Detroit. So that's another factor here. I like what New York did with this. And then again, especially if you add in what they did with OG and still have assets to make another move when the time comes.
I think that's dead on. And the other piece of it that is obviously really interesting here is, you know, I pulled up this tweet for the screen for the people. Is Adrian Wojnarowski is reporting OG Anunoby just had surgery to remove a loose bone fragment in his right elbow, and he's going to miss at least 3 weeks. Bojan and Burks give them real cover for the time while OG is out of the lineup.
Yep.
Right. And that should allow them to continue to maintain a high pace that will hopefully be able to allow them to get a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, especially with the Sixers falling back. The Cavs in New York are in this really interesting race right now, in my opinion, for potentially the 3 or the 4 seed. We'll be, you know, tracking the Heat certainly to see what they can do over the course of the next month. We'll be tracking a number of different teams here, but the Knicks and the Cavs right now feel like they're playing the best ball out of those teams outside of the Celtics and Bucks in the West. And or in the East. And I'm just really, really excited to see what ends up happening in that race between the two of them. The Cavs have won, I think, 15 of 16 now, and they have Evan Mobley and Darius Garland back. As we talked about when those injuries happened and all of those bench players stepped up, the Cavs got really lucky with their schedule. That schedule during their injury, during that like injury riddled section of their season was really poor, and it allowed them to kind of rack up wins, win like 7 of 8 games without Mobley and Garland. Schedule's going to pick up again. It'll be interesting to see, can they keep track now that they have Mobley and Garland back? The Knicks are in a really good position now. I love everything the Knicks have done this season. And I do just kind of want to focus this little final section of what we're talking about here on how smart I think Leon Rose has been in the way that he has gone about building this roster, maintaining his assets, using assets at the right time, and creating a roster that really fits well together. all of these pieces fit exceptionally well around Jalen Brunson if he's going to be your main player. OG Anunoby is an elite level defensive player who's like one of the best like 3-and-D, like third star, fourth star guys in the league. Julius Randle has been really impactful for them. Like he was just named an all-star. I probably wouldn't have named him an all-star, but like that's not a statement on his play. It's a statement on a lot of the other guys in the East. I really think that you look at the way they've built Dante DiVincenzo, an awesome mid-level exception signing. Bojan Bogdanovic, they have this great option on his contract for next season where it's non-guaranteed up to what? It's like $3 million or so.
Only, yeah, it's like essentially like a $20 million deal somewhere around there, and only $2 million is guaranteed. So, I mean,
right.
You know, we've talked about the Fournier deal. Maybe they would have ended up actually exercising that club option to have that salary to be traded. Well, now that could be Bojan if they want it to be. And then Burks, just real quick, is an expiring deal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they have an immense amount of flexibility, and to do all of this really, to get OG Anunoby, to get all of these, you know, players that they were able to, they didn't give up any of their like smorgasbord of draft capital and their treasure chest of draft picks. They're going to be in the mix for every star player that comes available now. And look at what they've built. Jalen Brunson has proven before in Dallas, he can play at an elite level next to a star player. OG Anunoby is a perfect player type to play next to a star player. Their center position in Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein, really, really solid players that I think will translate well at the big position playing next to a star. The Knicks are in an exceedingly attractive position now to appeal to a star because of how Leon Rose has gone about building this team. I know media gets frustrated with the fact that Leon doesn't talk. Hand up, if I was an NBA general manager in the New York market, I probably wouldn't talk to the media much, just to be real with it. I know that fans got a little bit frustrated early on with the lack of action because Knicks fans are starved for a winner in a real way. I think that the patient, really smart approach that Leon Rose has taken has really put the Knicks in an exceedingly attractive position here moving forward.
Well, and the crazy thing is that wasn't stuff people were saying 3 or 4 years ago, right, Sam? I mean, I just really got into this space 3 or 4 years ago, and it started with just the Pistons, and then it became NBA draft, and now with you, I'm doing NBA in general. But I was a big enough basketball, hoops, NBA fan and listened to enough podcasts like yours and all of that to hear like people just, what are the Knicks doing? And they just spent all of this money on this guy, and this guy. And it's like, now we went the complete opposite way where they are being constructed and moves are making so much sense, and they're keeping flexibility while they're at it. Like I'm looking at the cap sheet here again, Sam, like they also have Josh Hart at $18 million. So you want to go out and get a $40 million player, Bojan, Josh Hart, and a little bit more money, and it's done. There it is. And whatever draft picks it takes. Like, so, and I know people are like, oh, well, that's easy. There's some cap sheets you can look at where it's like $25 million player, and then it goes to $2 million. Go look at the Phoenix Suns. Now, that may have changed today with some of those moves, but you know what I mean? It's just, I think it is valuable to have those 15 to 20, you know, those level contracts. They have them with the assets and a team. If Brunson goes and does what he's been doing, is going to compete in the Eastern Conference. I don't know if they're better than the Celtics, but you know, they're right there. They're right below maybe. We've talked about it. I love the roster. He's done a great job. It's been a great job.
Yeah, no, I think he's done a fantastic job. And, you know, I always am a fan of these patient approaches. I think that they tend to pay off a little bit more, especially in bigger markets where you have so much margin for error, right? He's created an immense amount of margin for error in a marketplace that already gives you a crazy amount of margin for error. And look, like, I don't know if they're going to make the finals or anything, but like, this team is like a real, like if they get the 3 seed and Milwaukee is the 2 seed, and you're telling me that it's Tom Thibodeau against Glenn Rivers in a coaching matchup in the Eastern Conference semifinals, I don't know, man. Like, yeah, the Bucks are a lot more talented, but I'm intrigued to see what that series looks like. I'm really interested to see what it looks like. It could go one way or another, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I'm hoping I owe Jalen Brunson an apology by the end of these playoffs. Like, the Knicks have been a team I've always kind of liked Julius Randle, and I know he takes a lot of hate and stuff. I've kind of enjoyed that. I've become to really love Jalen Brunson. Dante DiVincenzo has always been a player and then Mitch Robb and the way he was playing. Hopefully he does get back. Hartenstein, like they just acquired a lot of players I kind of enjoyed watching, to be honest, Sam. And so I've kind of become like not necessarily a fan, but I don't necessarily root for anybody or whatever, but man, like I hope I owe Jalen Brunson an apology because I said I'm not sure he could be the best player in a series for 2 or 3. Like I think he can be in the first round, but can he do it against the Bucks? Like everybody would pick Giannis, right? But are you telling me that Jalen Brunson couldn't outplay or play well enough to give them a chance to win a 7-game series against the Bucks? I don't think I can sit here and say that he doesn't and couldn't play well enough to give them that, especially with everything they have around him.
Yeah, and especially with the way that the Bucks are built. Like I know that they went out and got PatBev today, but they didn't go out. They weren't able to go out and make a big move. And maybe we'll talk about them in the next section here. Maybe that's how we'll transition to the next section. We're just going to take a quick 10-second break and we'll be right back. And we're going to talk about some of the things that teams didn't do today. Okay, we're back. Here's the thing. I was surprised that a lot of teams were not able to accomplish much of anything today. And look, we can start with the Bucks. I think they weren't necessarily the main team that this applies to. They went out and got Patrick Beverley. I think Patrick Beverley really helps them actually. I've loved his energy this year. I've loved his ability to be annoying and pesty and frustrating for opposing teams. I love the immense amount of shit talk that he brings to the table every single time he takes the court. But a lot of, what I had kind of heard was that the Bucks were very, very active over the course of this week in trade talks. They really tried to go out and make something happen that made sense for them in a real way. Like a bigger move that kind of solved their defensive issues on a more substantial playing field, I guess. PatBev's definitely going to help. I have a lot of time for Patrick Beverley in a way that I think some people don't. But I was a little bit surprised they weren't able to go out and achieve something else, especially given Marjon Beauchamp, Andre Jackson, the number 32 to 35 overall pick in this draft, because they own Portland's second round pick in the 2024 draft. I kind of thought they'd be able to go do something else in addition to PatBev, and they weren't, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I like the addition of PatBev. Like you said, I think we've been screaming for some perimeter defense ever since that trade happened, right? Whenever, everybody, Damian Lillard goes to the Bucks, the offense is going to be better, the Dame and Giannis and all of that stuff. And it's like, okay, but who's going to take some of these defensive matchups? PatBev doesn't solve all of that. He is smaller, but man, he competes his butt off, he can play bigger than what he is, and he gets into players' heads and all of that. So I liked that move. I thought they needed some more guard depth. I think we talked about, maybe campaign wasn't the answer for that. I feel like some of the games I've watched recently, though, they haven't shown a lot of faith in Andre Jackson and Marjon Beauchamp and those guys. And so it just was interesting to me that we didn't see them go make a move for a wing, especially, quite frankly, after the Joel Embiid news. You would have thought that would have said, hey, this opens up the East even more for us. Not that they weren't going to go for it anyway, but this is really a chance for them to make a move. And, it'd be interesting to know, what did they try to get it on? Why were they not able to get in on it? What were they not willing to give up? So I think it's interesting. It was a nice move. I like the move. I'm still not sure it's enough for their overall depth and especially what they can do on the wing.
Yeah, so Brian K brings up, the Bucks young players don't have any trade value. They haven't shown enough. In general, that's sort of right. I will say there are teams that do really value Andre Jackson in some respect. I will say that 35th, 33rd overall pick, something like that, from the Portland Trailblazers. That was a pick that teams had some interest in. One thing that I do want to talk about in general is I think that this trade deadline continued to show something we've talked about a lot this year, Bryce. The 2024 draft, it just does not have a lot of interest from NBA executives right now.
Well, here's an example. The Detroit Pistons essentially traded a pick that's a couple picks higher than that for Simone Fontecchio. So like that there is your comp for what you could have gotten. Now maybe people say Troy Weaver way overpaid and whatever. Like I guess that could be an argument, but essentially the 33rd pick in the draft got Simone Fontecchio from the Jazz. And so the Bucks had to pick just a couple spots behind that and weren't able to go get, like, don't you think Simone Fontecchio would have made sense for the Bucks? Like to me, that would have been an interesting decision, right? So, could they
But you know what though? Like the Detroit offer for Fontecchio, and we'll talk about this again, was better than what the Bucks in all likelihood would have offered, unless they would have offered both Andre Jackson and that pick, because the pick is just slightly better. The Wizards pick is just very slightly better than the Blazers pick. And they also threw in Gabriel Procida, who is a guy that like I'm kind of interested in a little bit. So we'll see where that goes. Let's talk about the Lakers, because the Lakers were a team that was highly speculated upon throughout this. And I guess we'll hit on the Hawks not doing anything within this conversation as well, because the player that was most connected to the Lakers throughout this process was DeJounte Murray. From what I gathered, and also from reporting, the Hawks were very interested in Austin Reeves, and the Lakers weren't necessarily interested in moving Austin Reeves for DeJounte Murray. And frankly, if I was the Lakers, I would not want to move Austin Reeves plus things for DeJounte Murray. Like Austin Reeves' contract is exceedingly valuable for the Lakers here moving forward. I also don't know that the Lakers had quite enough value to be able to present a package to the Hawks for Murray while still maintaining a little bit of flexibility down the road to be able to do other things, which created, I think, some complications when looking toward what is the opportunity cost here. Should we go all in on this season? Should we go all in on having LeBron and Anthony Davis playing at this high of a level, basically staying healthy throughout the course of the season so far? Or should we try and wait until we have 3 potential first-round picks that can get moved in the offseason, as well as 3 pick swaps to be able to get in the bidding wars for potential stars that come available? Donovan Mitchell, whoever, we'll see who comes available. The playoffs always bring different outcomes in that way. What were your thoughts on how the Lakers handled this deadline?
Yeah, I mean, I just kept waiting for the shoe to drop. And, you asked me to make 2 predictions on our last episode, and I crushed one and was completely wrong on the other. And we'll talk about the one I crushed here in a little bit. The one I was completely wrong on, I told you, Sam, I think the Hawks are going to fire sell. I think they're going to sell, DeJounte Murray. And then I also think Hunter and Capella, something like that. They're going to sell, and they moved none of them. I guess my immediate thought is, what I always want to know why. Like, why did the Lakers not make the move? Was the Hawks asking price just ridiculous? Did the Lakers?
Let me kind of
please
answer that a little bit. Talking to other teams throughout the course of the week and the month leading into the deadline, when news spread that the Hawks were considering selling off and rebuilding this entire thing, the Hawks set a very high price on all of their players, to the point where, frankly, teams thought that the price would come down a little bit as we got closer and closer to the deadline. I haven't connected with as many people because I just woke up, 2.5 hours ago, and have been trying to prep for this and figure out what all the trades were that happened, and also trying to contribute to the Athletics Live blog. Shout out the Athletics Live blog. Go look at that for some analysis as well. But my impression based on all of this would be that the Hawks probably did not lower their asking price on a lot of these guys, because they have multiple years that they can try to make moves here on these players, right? Like Clint Capella becomes an expiring this summer. DeAndre Hunter will still have 3 years after this year. DeJounte Murray still has 4 years with his extension kicking in after this season. So Bogdan Bogdanovic was a guy that they just think is on a good contract at this point, and they were not in a rush to move him. So I think at the end of the day, they just never really got the offers that they thought they were going to get and decided to keep those guys. And from what I know, like, I think they probably overvalued a couple of those guys in the market, but that's, their prerogative, and they have time to be able to make these decisions now. They're not like rushed into anything.
And then I think I agree with some of the comments in terms of if that's truly what it was. I think actually what the Lakers did was quote unquote the right thing to do. Like, I don't think they have the team to maybe win the championship right now unless all of this comes back together. But I don't want to overpay and mess up my future if I don't think that move is going to put me in title contention either, or completely, deteriorate all assets. And this is my one all-in move, and I'm way overpaying to make that one all-in move. And so I think in that regard, like, they're handcuffed like you're handcuffed a little bit to what is available on the market, Sam. And for the Lakers, it wasn't really things around the margins. They did that last year and in the offseason and all of that. It was, if we're going to make a move, we got to go get like a real dude that's going to be a game changer. If that guy's not on the market, or that guy is on the market and the asking price is ridiculous, then it's hard to fault the front office for not going after it. It sucks to think that maybe they don't have what it takes. At the end of the day, though, you still have what looks to be healthy LeBron, healthy AD. I think Austin Reeves is very much rounding into perform. He had a huge night the other night whenever they won in Boston without LeBron and AD. I don't know what D'Lo, if he's going to keep, scoring the ball the way he has, but I'm not saying that I think they're going to put it together and make the magical run they did last year. But I guess my point, I understand why they would balk at making a move if the price wasn't right.
I think that's right. I also just want to pull up a tweet here from Damon Rangula, who, Lakers fan and talks about the Lakers quite regularly over on social media. And he says, like, people don't want to hear it, myself included, but the Russell Westbrook trade, not necessarily Russell Westbrook himself, closed the LeBron title window with the Lakers. And I understand that take to an extent. I think that the bigger thing is more that the Lakers just generally don't make great moves on the margins, and it tends to be like death by 1,000 paper cuts. This is why the moves on the margins are so important. And look, like the Russell Westbrook trade, I think is probably, if you were like percentaging things that, caused the Lakers to be where they are now, the initial Westbrook trade from the Wizards is probably the thing that is most there, but also like retaining Talen Horton-Tucker over Alex Caruso, just like a truly bonkers decision that didn't make sense at the time and continues to not make sense. Right. Little things like today, like they could have gotten under the luxury tax today, moved like one of their guys. I think they're like $1.5 million over the luxury tax. Could you have paid another team to take one of your guys, two of your guys, something like that, in order to get below the luxury tax, set yourself up so you're not worried about repeater tax and, following years and everything, and then set yourself up to potentially be a candidate for a buyout like Spencer Dinwiddie or something like that, right? I just find it all very interesting trying to determine why the Lakers are here. They made like a Hail Mary deal last year at the deadline, moving Russ and a first round pick to be able to get Jared Vanderbilt. Who else did they get? Why is my brain breaking? They got who else did they get at the deadline last year?
Well, Rui happened before. That wasn't the same deal, but Rui came before the deadline.
Yeah, it was. D'Angelo Russell was one of them, obviously, and then the third was who was the third is Malik Beasley, right?
Oh yeah.
So they go out, they get D'Angelo Russell, they get Malik Beasley, they get Jared Vanderbilt. Those guys help them make a run toward the Western Conference Finals, but like they didn't look competitive with Denver in that series. And, they beat Memphis, who was a team that hasn't really shown a lot of success in the playoffs yet. They beat a Warriors team that, is also in a similar boat to where they are now. I think more than anything, it's just like the things on the margins. And it's why, in my opinion, a team like the Clippers keeps ascending versus a team like the Lakers keeps bouncing up and down and making it hard. The Clippers struggle because of injuries, and we can talk about the efficacy of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George's pairing. They're incredible when they're on the court. Is it worth the injury history? Whatever, right? We can talk about that. But Lawrence Frank and that front office make great moves on the margins. Like even just today, right? Their only move is going to trade cash to the Nuggets for Ishmael Kamagate. It might not seem like much, but this is the last year with them being over the second apron that they can actually trade cash in a trade. But there's no limit on trading guys whose draft rights that you have. So just doing like small things on the margins like that really helps you set yourself up for potential deals, potentially like being involved in a third team where you need somebody's draft rights to use to be able to like touch the other team in the deal, right? It's just the small marginal things that add up. I think it's not something that's like even a 1% add or a 2% add to your, title expectancy or anything like that. It's the things that are even less than that just build and build and build that it gives you a chance. And, I think that, their draft history has been honestly pretty solid. Like Max Christie, I think is going to be fine at 32, and getting Austin Reeves as an undrafted free agent, getting Alex Caruso as an undrafted free agent. They've done fine for where they've picked, given the level of picks they've had in the last 5 years. And they've hit on some guys like Kyle Kuzma. They've hit on guys like Thomas Bryant. Like you can go through and you can find answers, but then you miss on Jalen Hood-Schifino, and then the next 3 picks are Jaime Jaquez, Brandon Pajemski, Cam Whitmore, and it's like, well, what are we doing here? What I mean?
And then the free agent signing you made in Gabe Vincent hasn't turned out as a positive at all either. And so,
and you miss the margins on the minimum deals that you bring in as well.
Yeah. That's what I say. Like none of those panned out either. And so, I think that's the really good point. I kind of mentioned if you're going to make a trade, it needs to be a big one, but you're kind of in that position because you didn't win on any of those. So yes, it's the very minute things you're talking about that keeps flexibility and options open and all of those type of things that, like you said, like it was even the stuff they did with Caruso's contract that doesn't put the extra year on it and stuff like that. Like when you really get into the weeds, they just weren't.
That's a great point, because they wouldn't have had to make the Talen Horton-Tucker versus Caruso deal or like choice if they'd given Talen Horton-Tucker a 3-year deal as a second-year player or as a rookie in the second round, as opposed to a 2-year deal.
That's what it was. It was on THT, not on Caruso, but it would have changed when they hit free agency.
But by the way, they did it again with Max Christie.
Yes.
And they did it again with Austin Reeves, who, could theoretically still be on a minimum deal this year, right?
Yeah.
Probably if they had handled their business properly, should be on a minimum deal right now. It's the little things on the margins, man. They really kill you. And they've really hindered the Lakers over the course of the last, 3 or 4 years since they won that title.
So it's all of those things, but then this year as well, like you said, then it's the Gabe Vincent didn't work. The draft pick didn't work. The minimum deals didn't work. Like none of that stuff worked out. And then you lost some guys that contributed, Schroeder's gone, Beasley's gone. All of those are, and some injuries to some of these guys. And there's just not enough.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. The Warriors are the other team that are in this very similar boat. And I was very surprised the Warriors did nothing. I really thought that the success that they've had recently with Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, Jonathan Kuminga in the front court, if you look at their last 10 games that they've played together, I think they've played like 150 minutes or so together. They're like a plus 30 in those minutes where those 3 guys have been on the court together. So I thought this would be an interesting time to try and do something with the Chris Paul deal, right? And look, they can do something with the Chris Paul deal heading into next season, whatever they want to do, right? They still have that on their books potentially, and they'll still have the salary slot. But like, Was there a move like what the Knicks did for a Bojan Bogdanovic? Was there a move for more of a guard that could be a creative guard? I think that's the thing that would have really helped them. Like, was there something out there? Could they have done like a Bogdan Bogdanovic deal from the Hawks? And I know I just got done saying that like the Hawks weren't wildly interested in using Bogdan in a deal, but like, could you have done something like Chris Paul and his expiring deal plus, Moses Moody and a pick or something? You get Bogdan, you get something else from the Hawks. That's something that like would have really, really lifted the Warriors. I think they're the team even above the Lakers that I'm like a little, it's more because they've had a lot of success recently after having gotten Draymond back that makes me wonder, like, should you have just bought into this and taken another swing at it just with like moves on the margins that you probably could have done?
I just want to touch on real quick because we're getting a little pushback about like Jalen Hood-Schifino. The expectations for rookies on teams is a little bit different. And I think it's like we're seeing what Podziemski is doing with the Warriors. So when you're a team like the Lakers, the Warriors, the Nuggets, whoever, you're drafting guys, especially in this era of the NBA, where you at least need them to be able to contribute in the regular season. I'm not saying Pods is going to go crazy in the playoffs, or if the Rockets make the play-in that Cam Whitmore is going to be able to contribute. I'm not saying Jalen Hood-Schifino might not be a good player, Sam, but the Lakers kind of could have used somebody that was ready to play right now, and they missed on an opportunity to draft one of those guys. I just wanted to touch on that real quick. You're right about the Warriors, because I feel like a few weeks ago it was they need to either make a big move or don't make a move at all, right? Like a move on the margins isn't going to really work. But now, because Pods is playing so well, Curry's had some insane games. Kuminga has played really well, and it looks like maybe Kuminga, Draymond, Andrew Wiggins, as you alluded to, actually works, which nobody thought was the case. It's like, hey, maybe you add one more actual piece to this, a little more depth, somebody that can score, somebody that can defend, whatever. That actually made a little more sense than it did 3 weeks ago when it's like, okay, well, what does adding Bogdan Bogdanovic really do? That's not going to increase your chances to really make a run. Where now, and maybe we're a prisoner of the moment over the last couple of weeks, but now it's like, okay, I can see them going for just this, not marginal is disrespectful, but Bogdanovic, but not this like superstar move, just something that really kind of helps, like a middle move, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think that I saw Casey Johnson in Chicago report that the Warriors reached out about Alex Caruso, who's like the most Warriors guy, really. And the Bulls asked for Jonathan Kuminga. And given how Kuminga is playing, you probably can't do that deal. I love Alex Caruso a lot. I don't even think that's like a wild ask from the Bulls. I wouldn't do it if I was the Warriors, but like I don't think it's a crazy ask. I just also am very, very interested to see what the Warriors end up doing the rest of the way, because it felt like they were one creator short. Honestly, the problem is now that like they can't go get a Kyle Lowry, they can't go get a Spencer Dinwiddie because they are over the second apron. And if you make more than $12 million, which is like the mid-level exception or the league average salary, you cannot sign as a buyout guy with a team over the second apron. So they're in a really, really difficult position to be able to go out and get one of these guards that comes available. I would have been fascinated to see them with somebody like that, but it's all the more reason that I think they probably needed to do something before the deadline, I think, to go get a secondary creator as much as anything, because that's really what they needed. They needed somebody in the backcourt that can create offense beyond Steph, because frankly, right now it's Brandon Podziemski, and I've really enjoyed watching Pods this year. I think he's definitely an all rookie guy. It's just, what does that look like in the playoffs on both ends of the court, I think is going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, he's still a rookie. So I just went on this rant about how, like, hey, they drafted a guy that was ready to play right now, and that's kind of what they needed. But he's still a rookie, and they are asking him to do a lot. And like, shout out Podge for being able to step up and do it, and the energy he brings. And this sets up for a really interesting offseason for the Warriors as well. I mean, everybody's been talking about it, but you have Klay Thompson as an unrestricted free agent. Curry's a year older, Draymond's a year old, like all of that stuff. They have to do something after you see this. you have to do something and figure it out. So it's an interesting off season for them now as well. But yeah, it would have been nice to see him try to make a move. And I'm surprised. I didn't know what it was. We talked about that, but them doing nothing. I mean, I guess we should, they traded Corey Josephs just to get off the contract, but that was it.
It would have been like really fun for them. Like, I don't think Luke Kennard would have cost a crazy amount from Memphis. Like, Luke Kennard would have been really fun in that offense to me. We'll see, like, if they can make a run. I think that, I never count out Steph. I never count out Draymond. People know that I am like just fully all in on the Draymond Green experience, but yeah, it's going to be tough for them, I think, without more than really one primary creator in Steph a lot of the time in the playoffs. Okay. Couple more teams before we move to whatever in the world the Bulls are doing. The Orlando Magic didn't do anything.
Yeah.
That was a team that I also expected to really try and make a move, a Malcolm Brogdon, a Bogdan Bogdanovic, a Luke Kennard, somebody that could bring like real shooting to their second unit. I expected them to do something like that, I guess, to really try and bolster their scoring, their shooting, give them a little bit more lineup flexibility. You look at the way that the Eastern Conference is laid out right now. They're currently sitting in 8th. They're a half game behind the Miami Heat. They're a game and a half behind the Indiana Pacers. They're 3.5 behind the 76ers. And as we've talked about, like, you brought up on the last podcast that you feel like the 76ers could end up falling out into the play-in range. So they're in a spot where they really could have tried to make a run at just making the playoffs full scale. And I'm surprised that they didn't go for it at the end of the day.
You think this is truly just like, hey, we're in the 8th spot. Our young guy, Franz and Paulo are playing well. I think Jalen Suggs has had a solid year. I enjoy watching him play. We've talked about all of the different centers there in, Orlando. Honestly, like the Jonathan Isaac minutes, like he's at least disruptive defensively. I really enjoy what that guy does. Is it just like, hey, let's see what this team can do before we go do anything crazy? I agree with you. Like, it would have been nice to see a move on the margins to bolster that backcourt. I don't know that I'm like up in arms about it. It's interesting, but I don't hate the idea. But you're pretty much like, I think we know how this is going to go in the play-in, or if they do get out of the play-in and then you'll have to take on Boston in the first round or something like that. But yeah, I'm a little bit surprised. I don't think I'm overly upset or frustrated by it.
I think the thing is for me, and I'm a little bit annoyed by it. And I would be if I was a Magic fan. They had expiring salary and Markelle Fultz to be able to do this. And you have all of these guards. Like, if Markelle resigns there, like, it'd be wild to me, just because you have drafted Anthony Black. You have a guy that looks like a piece of your core in Jalen Suggs. You have re-signed Cole Anthony to an extension. All of those guys can play point in some respect. Why would Markelle want to go back there, first and foremost? And second, you have all of these like younger guys. Like, you have Jet Howard. Maybe somebody would want to take a flyer on a Chuma Okeke. You have your first round picks. Like, you have all of these assets to be able to do something on the margins that could really help Franz and Paulo and Jalen Suggs and all these guys really get some playoff minutes into them before you make the run. I think that would have been really, really valuable by Orlando, but we'll see what their end goal is here.
Are you looking at just the guard? Like, I just want to look at the guys that were traded. So like the first name is like, could they have outbid for Buddy Hield? Like, is that a name you would have wanted them to?
Buddy would have been great.
So
Buddy would have been great.
3 second-round picks for Buddy Hield. So you're like, hey, Orlando, you would be like, if they top that, you would be comfortable with that.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. Like, I think that would have made quite a bit of sense for them. Again, like Luke Kennard, similar shooter kind of player, like Memphis trying to get flexible. I think all of their moves over the course of the last few days have stated a real desire to get flexible over the course of, the off season this year and everything. They have a team option on Luke Kennard for next season. If they pick up that option, I think they're over the tax for next year already, even before accounting for Alex Sarr or, whatever top 7 pick they get, whoever, right? You know, Cody Williams, et cetera, guy that they bring in the draft, or accounting for guy that they trade for with that draft pick, right? And I guess you could say that Luke Kennard gives them some expiring salary to attach to that pick, which gives them some more flexibility in the offseason to be star hunting, quote unquote, right? So maybe it makes sense, but if I was Orlando, like I would have tried to get Kennard like in a real way.
I mean, Tomas over here brings up a good point. Goga, Fultz, and Harris are all expiring contracts. I mean, your listeners know how I feel about Batadze. Harris is, again, if nothing else, an expiring contract, and Fultz, maybe you could get him in and decide what you wanted. I'm not saying that gets you anything huge, but like you're saying, surely somebody would like. I can't imagine now. I guess the response is we'll just sign Goga on the open market. But yeah, I mean, they had expiring guys, names that are a little bit intriguing, and you brought up some of the other stuff. So I guess in that sense, it is frustrating because they had the assets and the moves that they could have done it without moving anything that like really, really was part of the rotation or anything like that. So I guess I can see your frustration as we kind of get into the weeds on it. That makes sense.
Miami made their move early, so wasn't expecting necessarily a crazy amount from them. Indiana made their move early, probably not going to expect a crazy amount from them. The Cavs have won 15 of 16. Like it's hard to shake things up when you've done that. I'd heard like the Pelicans were like kind of sneaky all over the place, like looking to maybe do something over the course of the last, month or so. End up not doing anything. That's interesting, just given where they are. They're sitting in 5th. They are, a game and a half up on 8th right now in the West. We'll see what the future holds for the Pelicans because they get wildly expensive coming up here potentially with Trey Murphy's extension that they're going to have to negotiate and things like that. The Timberwolves only do Monte Morris. I think that is, relatively quiet deadline. It does really fill a hole for them at the backup point guard position, but can Monte play in the playoffs? Do they need a little bit more flexibility throughout their roster? I think that's a real question. The Kings don't do anything. They're currently in 7th.
I found
in
that
the
one
West
interesting
right now. I was a little bit surprised not to see the Kings do anything. But look, I think everybody's been waiting. Like, what's happening here? Like, how in the world do the Bulls not do anything at the deadline? Like Arturas Karnisovas, I guess, said, we want to stay competitive. We want to like compete in everything. Are you competing for the 8 seed? You're 3 games out of the 8 seed right now. You have DeMar DeRozan, who's expiring this year. You have Andre Drummond, who's expiring this year. You have this Zach LaVine deal
who's not playing the rest of the year.
Not playing the rest of the year. Like, I get not moving that one at least. You have Alex Caruso, who's never going to be more valuable than he is right now, to be able to trade for like real, genuine value. And you have the craziest one, though. And this is just like the insane one to me. Andre Drummond has been really good for them. Like, I want to give Andre Drummond his flowers.
Sure.
I think he has been fantastic as a backup center. They've started using him occasionally with like Nikola Vucevic. They've started, really utilizing him, and he's been impactful on their bottom line. Shout out Andre Drummond. That dude is on an expiring deal. I mean, even if you want to make the play-in, I guess he helps you. But like, end of the day, you're still 4 games up on Brooklyn in 11 right now. So you can make the play-in anyway. Like, you're 4 games up on the 11 seed. You're 3 games back of the 8 seed. You could not be in more of a no man's land scenario. And I guess that where I'm at is like, this should be a surprise to me, but it's not. It just continues to prove that this team wants to stay in the middle, and it's absurd.
Yeah. So in the outline, the Bulls and the Hawks are back to back because I did it by current ranking in the conferences. And I'm not going to say the phrase I wrote after both of those teams because sometimes my students watch these, but it was the same exact phrase, which is essentially like, what are we doing? Like what you have it right here on the screen. What are the Bulls doing? It doesn't, I don't get real quick. The Caruso thing, Sam, that's a good, he's all of a sudden he's on the last year of an insane deal. So you could have got him for really, really good money before like he eventually gets paid. This was the year to trade him because somebody would have him for less than 10 million next year. Now, if you wanted to trade him, then they're going to have to pay him. Like he's going to get paid more. He will never be on a better contract than what he's on right now. It's only going to go up whenever the next contract gets negotiated. So his value is only going to go down if you ever wanted to move him.
Yeah, 100%. He'll get a first, like if they want to move him next year, like they'll be able to get a first round.
Sure. No, like, I'm not saying it's nothing, but
issue, but like they would have gotten like real stuff for him. Again, like I have heard from teams that have offered the Bulls like real stuff for Alex Caruso, and it's just like not, they just shut it down. They truly just like shut it down every time. And I don't get it. The difference between the Hawks and the Bulls, and why I am a lot more harsh on the Bulls than I am on the Hawks, right? The Hawks have time here. None of these assets for the Hawks are ticking clocks, right? Like none of these assets for the Hawks are going to run out this offseason. DeMar DeRozan is a free agent this offseason. Andre Drummond is a free agent this offseason. Maybe you do re-sign them, but if you re-sign them, you're probably re-signing them to multi-year deals that might not be that valuable given their age, given that these guys are vets. DeMar DeRozan, I believe, turns 35 this offseason. If he has to sign like an extension with you, 35, 36, 37 years old, probably going to have to be a 3-year deal. Our team's going to like value that moving forward. Like this was the time to cash in 100%. And the Andre Drummond one, like Andre Drummond, again, has had a great year. He's 30 years old, but like, do we think this is going to like really last a long time for Drummond moving forward? I am just so skeptical of all of this decision-making. It does not make sense to me. I find it so hard to believe that like a front office executive would be behind it. I've seen the Casey Johnson report saying like Bulls ownership was willing to okay this. I find it very hard to believe that somebody that people have respect for in front offices, and people do like Arturas Karnisovas quite a bit around the NBA. I find it so hard to believe that he wouldn't recognize where this is going. And I haven't talked to him. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and pretend. I just like truly like find it difficult to believe.
What's the path? What is the path to really competing? Like what is the vision? Like, listen, there's some teams that are really bad right now that I think at least, even if it's a very small margin, have a chance to like really grow something out and have a chance to be competitors. What is it for the Bulls? Because you get your pick this year. You're not going to get that Blazers pick for 2 or 3 years. If they do this again next year, they're going to convey a pick to the Spurs. And it's like, what are we doing? Like, how are they going to do it? Because what's the asset even that you could trade to get a star? Like, where is the path to say, like, maybe this is a team that could have 2 star players on it? It's not even the draft. You know what I mean? Like, I realize we've talked about the draft here. And it's not great at the top. You still theoretically have a better chance if you're in the top 5 or 6 or whatever, then what are they going to end up? 10, 12, or if you don't have a pick at all, that really gives you 0% chance. I love Kobe White. Patrick Williams has improved throughout the season, all of that stuff. DeMar's only getting older, as you outlined. Levine, like, I just don't understand where's the path other than if you would have sold off some of this stuff, acquired some assets, and then tried to build it out from there. You didn't have to go completely we stink, win 7 games like the Pistons. Like, you could have kept Kobe White and Patrick Williams and some of those guys and still like had a competitive team that was fun to watch. But this makes no sense to me.
Yeah, totally insane. Let's take one more 10-second break, and then we're going to get into some deals that actually did happen over the course of the deadline. Okay, we're back. Let's talk about some fun deals that I am really excited about, actually, even though none of them were like star level trades. I love the Gordon Hayward to Oklahoma City fit. I think it's actually one that like will really, really help them moving forward. Essentially, the Hornets are going to get Trey Mann, the Davis Bertans contract that has $5 million guaranteed next season, the CA Michich, who I think has like 14, no, maybe even like 18 million guaranteed over the next 2 seasons, in 2 second-round picks, and the Oklahoma City Thunder are going to get Gordon Hayward. A, I love the fit of Gordon Hayward. B, to get off of that Michich deal and to no longer have like the 5 million for Bertans like hanging over their head next year, and to only do that for Trey Mann and 2 second-round picks while also getting Gordon Hayward in the process, that's just stellar work from Sam Presti and company. Like that is absolutely fantastic business from them. Not only getting off of long-term salary, but more than anything, Oklahoma City has like a real roster crunch, like potentially here moving forward. Right now, like if Utah makes the play-in tournament, they're going to have like potentially 2 lottery-ish picks. Like right now, I think if the draft was held today, they have like 12 and 13 in the draft. No, sorry, they have 10 and 13 in the draft. They have Houston's pick, and then they have Utah's pick as well, as long as Utah's falls outside of the top 10. They moved, if I remember correctly,
they moved their own, right? In the Gafford trade for a pick swap.
That's right. So like all of these things have been like they're ironing out, but getting rid of Trey Mann, getting rid of the Michich deals, it creates roster space for them. And they were on like a real roster crunch here moving forward. So I think this is so fantastic from Oklahoma City. And we'll maybe talk about the Hayward fit as well. But like, what was your thought on the Hayward deal for the Thunder?
Yeah, so just real quick, Michich has 7.7 next year and then a club option for 8 the year after that. So
okay.
Just to kind of round that out. Yeah, this is exactly what I wanted the Thunder to do. I said I don't want them to make a big move, but I want them to make a move where it's like, hey, we add Gordon Hayward to this. I think he fits their system, what they do, all of those things. He's an expiring, so it keeps flexibility there. But it gives you a guy that when you get into the playoffs, if any of these other guys aren't able to play, if Giddey doesn't get guarded and can't make shots, if somebody else goes cold, if somebody gets injured, unfortunately, like I hate to speak those things into the universe, but we know all of these things happen. I know Gordon Hayward, people are going to go like, he has his own injury history, but you bring in somebody that can help you, right? And that's it. I think the worst thing for the Thunder is you get into the playoffs and it's SGA is ready, Chet is ready, Jalen Williams is ready, maybe even Dort is ready, but Giddey wasn't and somebody else wasn't. It's like, man, if they had one more rotation player, they really could have made a run at this. And now you at least shouldn't be able to say that. Like you can really find out. I loved it. I think I had mentioned, Hayward to the Thunder whenever we've talked about this, and they don't even give up any of the first round. Not in this deal. They didn't even give up any of the first rounds, anything like that. Wasn't crazy assets. I think it's a really smart deal. I love it. I hadn't even dove into like all this, like the caps. It's just like with Michich and the money and all of that as well. So that even makes more sense. And so I like it a lot.
The big thing with the Hayward fit as well in Oklahoma City is that the way that some teams have started to guard Oklahoma City with their starting lineup is they will have teams like they'll have their big man like sag off of Josh Giddey, right? In the playoffs, that was going to become even more stark of a reality, right? Teams were just going to attack that, and stay off of Josh like the whole game, basically. Every time he's on the court, I think they probably would have sagged off of him to try, because a big reason why is it's almost like a credit to Oklahoma City as much as anything. their driving game is so dynamic because of how they space the court around Shea. Anything that you can do in order to get an extra body in the paint is like vital. With Gordon Hayward on the team now, it's going to be really, really hard to do that if Josh Giddey doesn't have it going that night. Like, they'll just be able to remove Josh from the lineup very easily and go, okay, we have Gordon Hayward now. Okay, we have, Isaiah Joe now. We have Cason Wallace now. We can throw a lot of these different guys out there that teams will at least like somewhat pay attention to. Not necessarily Cason, but Isaiah Joe, you have to stay attached to him all the time. Gordon Hayward, you have to stay attached to him as a defensive player. It's going to open up driving lanes in such a substantial way, even beyond what we've seen for Oklahoma City when Giddey is on the court. It just gives them more depth and it gives them another option. And schematically, I think it's really, really important for them.
Well, think about how much more of a pretzel that puts a defense in when you can't take your 5-man and put him on Josh Giddey and let him hang out. Who are you going to put him on now? Because what that did was that allowed teams to put their 4-man or somebody else on Chet because they knew their 5-man couldn't stay in front of Chet, who can pick and pop, ghost and pop, bring it in transition, shoot it, but then also attack a closeout off the bounce. So now if you're forced, it's not just that, like opening up the lane, it's now forcing that 5-man to guard Chet Holmgren on the perimeter because you can't go put him on Josh Giddey or whoever it is. So it really could open up a lot. And I just like it because it fits. He can dribble, pass, and shoot. And we've talked at length about how that's what this Thunder team is built on. All 5 guys being able to dribble, pass, and shoot. And he fits right into that. So I think it's a really nice fit. I know some people wanted a little more size and maybe some, rim protection off the bench and some of those things. For me, this was the move I wanted to see him make.
I agree with you. I think this was probably the right move for Oklahoma City. The next team, let's talk about Dallas, okay. I would say. So Dallas is a better team than what they started the day as. And I think it's not worth missing that. Yeah. Daniel Gafford is going to give them 48 minutes of great rim protection when combined with Derek Lively. That's something that they've really been lacking. Getting him for essentially a 2028 pick swap and getting off of the Rashawn Holmes deal for next season, that's actually like a great deal, I think. Like that is to me a fantastic, fantastic deal by the Dallas Mavericks. And I love that trade. Like I have no qualms at all about what Dallas did there. And I think that is really, really going to help their defense. And I think it's really, really going to help them moving forward. I'm a little bit less sold on the PJ Washington deal. And the reason for that is like, we just saw Steve Clifford like come out 2 nights ago and basically say, yeah, there are guys that average 15 and 16 points per game in this league and have been in the league for 5 seasons and their teams never win. And they stick around because they average points and people think they can fix it. And their teams just don't win because they don't defend and they don't do this. It's really hard to not think that was about PJ Washington. If you've watched PJ Washington's like effort on defense this year, his rebounding effort has not been good enough. His defensive effort, especially like in transition, has just not been good enough, frankly. Could that just be Charlotte malaise? Like maybe I would hear that out, but like he's not a good enough offensive player to even be like questionable on that end, given how much of a roller coaster it is on offense for him. In theory, PJ Washington gives Dallas some really interesting flexible lineups where you might be able to play him at the 5 and you might be able to roll out like a super switchable, fun, creative lineup that has like 5 out, and you have Kyrie and Luka, and you have guys like Josh Green and Dante Exum and Derek Jones and et cetera, right? You have the ability to do like all of these things. It's just not the reality of who PJ has been the last couple of years. And I hope that it changes, I guess is what I would say. I really hope that like mindset is able to shift, because it's been quite frustrating if you watch the Hornets like regularly, I guess.
I mean, I want to start with the Gafford one. I've always been a Gafford fan, and I think he just fits perfectly with Dallas. Like, I think he could really thrive. Like, we've seen Derek Lively thrive, right? I mean, you're getting lobs thrown to, all you have to do is set a good screen, roll to the rim, jump really high, catch the ball. And I realize I'm oversimplifying it. Like, that was probably disingenuous there. But, you know, he didn't have that guy doing that with him in Washington, and we've seen Derek Lively thrive. I think Gafford can thrive. So I like that move as well. I kind of like PJ Washington offensively, and I think what you said, where it's like a roller coaster on that, because when it's good, I think it is enough, and it's an upgrade over Grant Williams offensively, at least what we've seen from Grant Williams this year. Do you think this maybe speaks to a belief in Josh Green, Derek Jones, and Dante Exum being able to take those defensive matchups, and then they think like, hey, we need this floor spacing and this offense from PJ, and we have these other guys defensively, and we don't need what we thought we were going to need from Grant Williams defensively. Now, the question on the board is, I mean, I think they definitely did, but still, just in terms of what he offers, I still don't know that I hate it.
Yeah, I don't hate everything, because again, like, I love the Gafford deal and I think it makes sense. And there's a way for this to work with PJ Washington. And it really just involves him becoming more detail oriented.
Sure.
Frankly, like, as a player, if he is willing to like put in the effort and like become more detail oriented, focus in on what is necessary, right? I do think he can be a really valuable piece for them. Part of where my worry is for Dallas at this point is I think they are still like quite a ways away from contending. I Kyrie has been fantastic, and Luka is a top 5 player in the league, and it certainly comes alive in the playoffs, even more so than what he is in the regular season, which is already an unbelievable player. But you look at teams like Denver, and you look at teams like Boston, and you look at teams like, I don't know, like Oklahoma City's pretty deep now and also has a top 5 player in Shea, and Milwaukee, has Dame and Giannis, and then they also have a bunch of other guys in Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez and everything like that. Dallas really has continued to like box themselves in terms of flexibility. Like, they can't move any more first, like right now, like, but they do have, as Bernardo says in the comments, starting this summer, 2 firsts and 4 seconds that they can move in a trade. Right. The problem is, how many guys do you think Dallas is away from contending right now? Like, really contending?
How many guys?
Like, do you think they need another star? Do you think they need like another starter quality player? Do you think they need 2 more starting quality players?
I was going to say, like, as much as I love Lively, he's still a rookie. So like, how much are we counting on that come playoff time? And I don't know that I would say, like, I don't think they, like, if you ask me who their third best, we've had this debate, like, who's their third best player?
Yes. So like this is like a thing I did earlier, right? Someone like asked me this on Twitter. Would these players be the third best player on the Dallas Mavericks right now? Michael Porter Jr.
Yes.
Aaron Gordon.
Yes.
Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. If you're thinking about a playoff series right now, would KCP be better than any of the guys that Dallas have beyond Luka and Kyrie?
Probably.
I think the answer to that is yes as well. Given his like 2-way play, his ability to.
That's what I said. Like, I think like Tim Hardaway Jr. has really scored the ball really well this year, but KCP is definitely better defensively.
Yeah, like it's a close conversation. I would lean KCP personally. Uh Oklahoma City. So let's remove Shea and Jalen, right? Chet Holmgren would definitely be their third best player. Would Lou Dort be their third best player? It's pretty close, right?
Yeah.
In a playoff series where he is hounding like the opposing team's best defensive player or best offensive player, he's knocking down 40% of his threes. I think it's close, right?
Yeah.
Is Gordon Hayward their third best player?
Probably.
So depth wise, you're like pretty far behind the 8 ball there. Is Jaden McDaniels their third best player?
God damn, he's so good defensively. Like now I'm even going to Lively, like is what he does for them. Is what Lively does for them more impactful than what Jaden McDaniels would be?
I don't think so personally, but like Jaden's like Jaden's offense has not been great this year.
That's what I was gonna say.
Like
that
Jaden's like a full scale, like all defense guy.
No, absolutely. Right? Like his defense is insane. That's what I'm just like,
yeah.
What does that offense look like in the playoffs? Is my only hesitation there.
I don't know, but I would probably venture toward yes if I was being honest. He is such a difference maker on that end, and I think like teams at least guard him out there to where I would rather have that like two-way ability on the court from Jaden McDaniels. You look at Boston, right? Like all of Kristaps Porzingis, Derek White, Drew Holiday, like very obviously. So I say all this to say, like, we just went through a lot of guys, right? We talked a lot about like 4th and 5th best players on teams. They would like very clearly be the 3rd best player on Dallas still after these moves. I think that they are probably still like 2 starter quality players away from contending like in a real way.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I mean, I think them being contenders is Luka and Kyrie just going crazy, right? Like that's the path, which they absolutely are good enough to do.
Can they stop anybody if those guys do that?
Probably not. But are those guys good enough offensively to like, could those two go on a tear with the spacing they have around them and enough defense from Josh Green, Derrick Jones Jr.? I'm not saying this is like a high percentage, but I'm like, is there a path? Is there a vision where that could happen?
Maybe. They have a 122 offensive rating when Luka and Kyrie are on the court together. Like it's possible if you play those guys for 36 minutes per game together that you can be at 122 and you can make that work. And hopefully the defense and like the depth pieces like hold up just enough. It's just
to your point, they're not in the class of these other guys, of these other
on
teams.
on top of that, and that would be okay if they had like real flexibility, right? But like Oklahoma City has all these guys and they have flexibility, right? Like, and they can move 45 first round picks. The New York Knicks, right? Like they have all these guys and they have all the flexibility in the world to be able to go out and get a number 1. Even like the Lakers this offseason have more flexibility to go out and get a star or like a very high end starter than what the Dallas Mavericks do. So the reason I'm worried about this is that let's just like run through the teams ahead of them, right? Boston, I think, is going to have the ability to go out and get another star more easily than them, I think. New York certainly would. Philadelphia will have more pick capital to be able to go out and get a star than what Dallas will. The Cavaliers, like they have like the 4 guys, right? Where if they really wanted to go out and like shake up their roster, like they could do that. And they're ahead of Dallas right now. Maybe not in a playoff series. I probably would take Dallas over Cleveland in a playoff series though. Milwaukee is just very far ahead of them right now, I think. And they'll take a step back at some point, but right now they're ahead. Oklahoma City is ahead of them and has more flexibility long term by a landslide. Denver is just very, very far ahead of them right now. They don't have as much flexibility, but they have Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and the three guys that I mentioned before. Minnesota doesn't have a crazy amount of flexibility.
Yep.
Utah is currently only 2.5 games behind Dallas, and they have real potential to go out and get a star, right? Like they have all the picks in the world. San Antonio has a 7'4" alien and like 11 picks that they can move in trades and like some interesting younger pieces. They're way behind Dallas right now, but they're coming like in a real way. I just say I worry that Dallas is a little bit more boxed in than what you would want to see from a team that is like 5 games above 500 right now.
So I guess that my question is, as you talk about this then is, even though we like the addition
real
of,
quick,
yeah,
when you get into bidding wars for stars and for like super high level players, those teams are all going to be able to outbid Dallas, I guess is my point when they're trying to add more moving forward. Continue.
So, and that's, I was just gonna say, like, we both agree the addition of Gafford is a player that makes sense, right? Like in a vacuum makes sense.
Totally.
We both said 48 minutes of some rim protection, lob threat, gravity at the rim, all of that stuff. PJ, like we outlined, like can be really good offensively, upgrade over Grant Williams, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't feel like this is just me trying to grasp, like, as much as like, hey, those players kind of make sense and all of that, it doesn't move the needle enough for the capital they had to give up. Like you would have rather almost just, hey, let's just keep it is what it is, keep flexibility, because these don't get us maybe even out of the play-in game, where maybe this offseason or next year's deadline, we can make a move that actually moves the needle.
I think I would have done the Gafford deal. I wouldn't have done the PJ Washington deal is where I'm at.
Okay.
I think Gafford like helps them like really, especially for the price tag. I think PJ Washington helps them, but I don't know if he helps them in as much as he limits their flexibility moving forward. And PJ, like you can still turn around and trade PJ, right? Like he will have value in some way, shape, or form. It's just, I don't know if he'll have that kind of value. Let's move now to, I do want to talk about the Hornets real quick.
Okay.
I think the Hornets have done an outstanding job this offseason or this trade deadline. I think they've done as well as you can possibly have done, not moving a star level player, moving like role player-y guys and finding ways into interesting players. They got first round picks for Terry Rozier and PJ Washington. They got a former first round pick who's shown like some flashes in Trey Mann. I've never been quite as high on Trey as some, but a guy worth looking at the very least. Like quite a few second round picks. They ended up moving a couple second round picks as well over to Dallas in the PJ Washington deal. I just think that they've done a ton here, given what their assets were, if their goal was to rebuild. I would have loved them to move Miles Bridges, but it seems like Miles Bridges was not going to accept anything, given what Rich Paul told Brian Windhorst over at ESPN, that he was not going to accept a deal anywhere because he has veto rights on any trade, having picked up his qualifying offer. But given the assets they had on the table, I think they did as well as they possibly could have. And I rarely say good things about Mitch Kupchak as a GM. So I just want to be very clear. I think Charlotte did unbelievable selling for what their assets were.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the second round picks were a wash, right? Because they got 2 in the deal for Gordon Hayward, but they sent out 2 in the deal that sent PJ to Dallas. But as you know, somebody that covers a team who traded off a bunch of players and got no first round picks in return, I can't help but really appreciate a team who returned 2 first round picks, one of which is only top 2 protected. So that's very likely to convey in 2027. The other one is protected, the one from Miami in 2027, but unprotected in 2028. Now I realize with the Miami Heat, like that's not going to be a lottery pick, either of those years, most likely, even in 2028, if it's unprotected and makes it there. But just the fact they got 2 first-round picks for those guys, that stood out to me on a day, again, like I said, when the team behind me traded as many guys as they did and didn't return a single one. So yeah, I think it's fair to say, like you say, you get interesting guy in Trey Mann, like who knows? And Micic isn't an awful player, and then you get off that contract eventually. And so I'm with you. I like what they did. You still have the core of LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller and Mark Williams. And, even with everything off the court, Miles Bridges has played well on the court this year.
The 76ers made a deal for Buddy Hield. That's a deal that I actually am pretty good with. They traded Marcus Morris, Furkan Korkmaz, and 3 second-round picks. They also moved Daniel House and a 2nd-round pick to the Pistons, I believe.
Yep.
And then they also traded Patrick Beverley for campaign, basically, and a 2027 second. And then they traded Jaden Springer to the Celtics for a 2027 2nd-round pick as well. Active day for the 76ers. I think that the Hield deal kind of outweighs everything for me. I've seen some 76ers fans be a bit frustrated by this, but the 76ers, as we talked about on the show for the last month, it feels like they're going to try and stay flexible, keep all of their options open this summer, and then hopefully be able to hit the trade market with the pick capital that they have and have acquired from the James Harden deal earlier this year. And then also maybe the free agency market, if somebody really truly comes available that they love. Beyond that, I think Hield is an awesome fit in Philadelphia. The sets that they run for Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, you have to send help so substantially to both of those guys. Having Hield, who has immense gravitational force across the league, guys stay attached to him. Guys will leave rim runners to stay attached to him on the perimeter because he is such a good shooter on open 3-point shots. And he does it off of movement. He creates these shots in a real substantial way. The thing that immediately came to my mind was the 76ers love running these empty side ball screen actions for Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, right? Now, imagine if you start Buddy Hield in the opposite corner in those situations, and then you run an exchange where he flies up to the wing and wingman comes down to the corner. Or if you like the guy that is guarding Buddy and you want to have him be the low man defensively, you can just keep Buddy in the corner. It's going to open up a ton of space for Maxey and Joel Embiid in those actions. I think this is a really, really good ad for Philadelphia. I think it's a really good ad.
Do you think this means they're definitely planning on Joel being back at least for end of regular season into a playoff run? Because when we talked about this, my thought was they don't make a move like this, kind of quote unquote on the margins, if you don't think Joel Embiid is coming back. When I saw this, my initial thought was, okay, they think they can weather the storm till Joel gets back. Buddy makes a lot of sense, right? Because he's an expiring contract, so they keep the flexibility. And so that's where my mind went, and I liked it. The interesting trade for me was then the PatBev deal, where I actually thought, okay, if you're going to kind of quote unquote go for it still this year, wouldn't you rather have PatBev on your roster than campaign? So that was the one that almost it not huge, but contradicted it a little bit for me. I don't know what that was about, but I did like this Buddy Hield deal for the when you can take a player like that and just, here's the other thing, they can put him wherever they want on the 3-point line. If they want him on the same side as the action, they can do it because his man isn't going to help off. And then you have more space on the other side for cutters or a pin in or a flare screen or whatever. You can have 2 guys on that side instead of 3 because the guy guarding Buddy in the corner isn't helping off. And if he does, then he's going to give up a 3. So having a shooter like that does really create all sorts of other and you can ghost screen him. You can run him in Spain or stack, ball screen stuff. All of those things are options now.
Imagine if you just ran like a 5-2 screen for Joel, like handling the ball and like Buddy just like ghosting these things,
Yep.
right? Where like you kind of have to stay attached to Buddy, but like you kind of can't because you also need to form a wall with Joel driving to the rim. It just really opens up a lot of different offensive options, I think, for Philadelphia, and keeps all of their options open this summer. I think it's like a real ad for them in the way that their offense operates.
Yep. No, it makes sense.
Next up, let's do Toronto next. I don't know what to make of this like Kelly Olynyk deal. So Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji for Otto Porter. Who else is in this deal?
Kyra Lewis.
Kyra Lewis is in this deal to Utah. And they get a 2024 first round pick. And I believe that they're able to fit Agbaji into a trade exception, if I remember correctly, is kind of how they structured it. Because I think Kyra and Otto like combined for like 10 million or so, and then they get Agbaji into a trade exception. So it's like structured almost as like two separate deals. If people are wondering like the minutia on how they could actually do this. On some level, I get. I'll start with you. What is this? Explain to me.
So you text me when you woke up or whatever, and you're like, hey, like, this were my thoughts. What do you think? And, you know, I gave you some thoughts and whatever. And I said, the one deal that's not registering with me right now is this Raptors deal. Like, I don't understand the move here unless they just love Ochai. As I've thought more about it, is this a straight up like, hey, we don't believe in the 2024 draft. We'll take a shot on a former first round pick in Ochai Agbaji. And listen, we both think Kelly Olynyk is a good player, right? I mean, I think we both think that is a very good player. We mentioned him and, you know, in terms of the Oklahoma City Thunder, when we were talking about potential targets for them, he is on an expiring. So it's like, do they plan on bringing him back and using him as a third big in the rotation next year? I guess I haven't quite figured out the rationale behind it. My only thought is they must really like Ochai and think that bringing him in is a better bet than taking a selection in this 2024 draft.
So I think that has to be the calculus here, because Kelly Olynyk, look, they're in, what are they right now in the East? Are they 12th, if I remember correctly? Something like that. And they're like 5 or 6 games out of the play-in right
12th
now.
out, and 4 back of Atlanta. 11 or 12th and 4 back, excuse me.
Okay, 4 games out of the play-in right now. So probably not a play-in team. So they're probably not getting value from Kelly Olynyk this year. If you want to run it as like okay, we want to get Kelly's bird rights, and we think that having like a spacing center behind Jakob Poeltl that can give us different options to play with Scotty Barnes is like our primary creator, as well as with RJ Barrett, who is going to drive and try and like attack the rim in a real way. I kind of get it. I think that there is like a real chance that Kelly and Quickly particularly will have like really good synergy together. Just kind of the way, like thinking about how they operate in ball screens, like both of them. But like Kelly's a free agent this year, and the Raptors are a team that project to have cap space. Like they're going to be able to sign him if they would want to in the offseason, like point blank. They would have been able to do this in the offseason, which to me says they're moving this first round pick because they like Ochai Agbaji. And I just don't know if he is worth even like a late first round pick based off of what we've seen this year. I don't think he's like a terrible player or anything, but he's athletic. And like the idea is he can be like a 3-and-D guy, but he's like kind of undersized for the role. It's 6'4.5", 6'5", whatever we want to call him. Not crazy long. He has like 6'9" wingspan or so, like not, you know, one of these crazy long 3-and-D guys. And the shooting has been okay. It's been a roller coaster throughout his career. Really, he's been like a 33% 3-point shooter this year. He gets them up. He's confident. He fires them, but like, I, I think I'd rather take a shot in the 2024 draft, given that you get that guy for 4 years on a rookie scale deal, as opposed to basically only 2 more after this one for Ochai. Like, I think I'd just rather have the pick, I guess.
Yeah, I think so as well. And so that's where it's like, okay, where does KO then factor into this? And I guess if he factors in a big way, then it makes a little more sense. But you're right. Like
But
there,
I guess my thing is that you could have just done
yeah,
this in the offseason if you wanted KO.
because you're like you said, I think the point is you're not getting any value from KO this year. And so
Yeah.
I think
If
that's
if
the
they
big part.
weren't a cap space team this summer,
Sure.
it would make more sense to value Kelly Olynyk in that way. If they are going to be a cap space team, which completely changes it. It's why we talked about like the Tobias Harris thing for the Pistons, right? Like getting Tobias Harris now versus trying to get him in free agency. You can just get him in free agency. So like,
Yeah.
why give up an asset for him? It's actually like very much the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, like, I don't know. Like this was the big one for me. This was probably the one that not the other ones I wasn't anticipating or didn't come out of nowhere a little bit, but this was a big one where I was just like, huh, that one,
Yeah.
that one was a little bit weird to me.
Well, it's interesting too. It does feel like Utah was basically the only team that like wanted to get into the 2024 draft, right? Like all these teams like got rid of 2024 picks, right? I guess the Wizards as well, because the Wizards took one for Daniel Gafford, but they just need young players in a real way. Like it makes total sense. Like they should be trying to get picks, but Utah was like the only team it feels like that like really made a conscious effort to go get them. And between the number 32 or whatever it's going to be for Fontecchio and then this pick, like it's interesting to me that was the choice here.
Well, they're kind of in the same range, right? So it's like, okay, did it just happen that it worked out this way? Or does their scouting department feel like there's a couple of shots, some players in that 25 to 35 range where they're like, hey, we think this could be actually pretty good value in this draft. We've talked about this a lot, that it's not the top end talent, but where's the depth lie? And is there some guys that it could be, good rotation NBA players to be found at the end of the first or top of the second or whatever? Maybe their scouting department has, said, hey, this is the sweet spot. This is going to be it in the 2024 draft. And they went out and got selections there, or maybe it just happened to be where the picks lie. Like I'm not saying, but maybe.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, Utah's scouting department is quite smart, and look, I think Utah did a fantastic job this deadline, like working the assets they had while still maintaining the ability to like contend here near the end, because they have this pick that, again, you and I have talked about. Like, I think they should want that pick to transfer this year. It's either this year, like next year, basically, that pick is going to transfer to Oklahoma City if everything goes right for Utah, right? I would want it to transfer in this draft. I think that this draft is not great. So the fact that they were able to deal from a position of strength, Kelly Olynyk, Simone Fontecchio, 2 front court guys, when they have Lauri Markkanen, they have Walker Kessler, John Collins, Taylor Hendricks, all of these guys that they can hopefully allow to step into roles, Bryce Sensabaugh maybe, like it should allow them to stay competitive within the play-in race while also getting assets in a real way, getting this late first round pick, getting this, 32 to 35, somewhere in that range, second round pick. And on top of it, they go out and they get Gabriel Presida, who I think like has a chance to come over at some point if his shooting development goes right. I think they just did really, really well in terms of managing the assets they had. And also, in general, I am a fan of teams that move early on prospects. I think that if you feel like it's not working, being willing to move early on somebody is much better than waiting too long.
Well, look what the Detroit Pistons just had to do today with Killian Hayes because they waited too long.
And the Charlotte Hornets with James Bouknight. We'll talk about them maybe now. Maybe that's our transition into the Pistons. Let's talk about. So the Pistons moved this early pick that they had from Washington in the second round, which will be something like 32 to 35 in the 2024 draft. And Gabriel Procida. And one other thing, Kevin Knox. To the Utah Jazz for Simone Fontecchio. They moved Bojan and Alec Burks for Quentin Grimes,
Malachi Flynn, Arcidiacono, Evan Fournier contract in 2 seconds.
They moved Monte Morris for Troy Brown, Shake Milton, and a second round pick.
Mm-hmm.
They got a 2024 second round pick for just basically taking the Daniel House deal
into a TPE.
Yep. They waived Joe Harris, Killian Hayes, Daniel House, Ryan Arcidiacono.
That's it.
And Killian Hayes. Did I say Killian Hayes?
Yeah.
I think all of this makes sense to me. And so no, let's start here. You just did the Pistons Pulse podcast.
Yep.
What was the tenor of the conversation?
Kind of that, in terms of, it's like, oh, they decided that wings, and specifically wings that can space the floor and defend, is important. And maybe that makes sense around a young backcourt of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, and a front court player like Jalen Duren. And that's what they did. They went and got Fontecchio. They went and got Quentin Grimes. Like, even at the end of the day, Troy Brown Jr. and Shake Milton, I realize people are like, hey, this is a great deal for the Timberwolves because those guys are fringe rotation players and they got a real backup point guard in Monte Morris for those two guys. Well, they were fringe rotation players on a top seed in the West. Think what that means to a 7-win Detroit Pistons team for the rest of the year. Like, those guys come in and they can defend a little bit and they shoot 35, 36% from three on a team that had no wings. This team was starting Kevin Knox at the 4 because they had no wings, no forwards, nothing like that. So, I mean, it makes sense. I'm with you. It makes sense. Maybe the front office learned. I don't love the process of how they had to get here. I do not like that at all. Essentially, all the moves in general, Sam, netted 1 second-round pick. That's it. Like, all the second rounders that got moved around, they netted 1. Then Quentin Grimes, who I think is long-term, Simone Fontecchio, who is long-term, and then they did keep their financial flexibility in terms of expirings and all of that.
And they moved Bojan Bogdanovic.
Sorry. Bojan, Alec Burks. Bojan, Alec Burks, and Monte Morris were the relevant, what I would consider the relevant players. Yeah, sorry, I left that part out. My bad.
The thing that they've been missing all year, even just more than wings, right, are players who can both do offense and defense, right?
Yeah.
Like, Quentin Grimes can defend on the wing and can defend some guards, and he can shoot. Like, the on-ball limitations, I think, are pretty real. But when you have Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, I think that those are fine at the end. And
Marcus Sasser and what he's doing on ball as a rookie.
Absolutely right. I think Quentin Grimes can play with both Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, or he can play with one of those guys, or he can play bench units with Marcus Sasser and be in a good position there, right? I would probably try to start Quentin Grimes with both Jaden and Cade when Cade gets back. I think I would want to see that at the end of the day, but Monty Williams is less said the better right now about Monty Williams. My God, what a mess that situation is.
Jaden Ivey is playing a lot of minutes now.
It's nice. I'm glad to see that Jaden Ivey, who is a good basketball player, is playing well and playing a lot of minutes, given that he's always been a good basketball player. But hey, nonetheless, getting Simone Fontecchio was a deal that I think, like, a lot of, like, nationally kind of people crushed yesterday.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't expect that feedback or like that. What's the perspective? Like, I always want to understand the other side of things.
I think it was an overpay. It was the idea of, like, this guy's entering restricted free agency and you're going to have to pay him a little bit to keep him, and et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Fontecchio has been useful. Do I think this was an overpay? Probably like a little bit,
Sure.
but if they really wanted him, and like the question is like, if you're the Pistons and you're not going to really get value out of him this season, or like in terms of wins and
Yeah,
losses
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
is it worthwhile to move the assets you had to do that? Right. At the end of the day, I think they didn't really have a choice because he was like, I can tell you from like talking to teams, like Fontecchio was quite popular on the market. He was making $2.5 million or whatever. Teams like Phoenix, like Boston, like Milwaukee, these teams that are like over the second apron, they could afford him and like very easily make it work for any situation that they have. So that's why it costs what it costs. He's been really useful. Like he's not a great defender. He's like pretty good on that end. He's
Agreed.
smart. He knows where he needs to be. He's big. He's physical.
He's big and
like,
strong. Yeah, yeah.
strong. Like it's not dissimilar from Bojan. He's just younger and like has the speed that Bojan is like kind of lost over the years, being 34. He can also really shoot and he makes quick decisions. Like Detroit just desperately needed to be able to play guys on the basketball court who were both good at offense and defense. They did not have enough of those guys, and having those guys now will hopefully allow them to evaluate their roster in some way, shape, or form in the same way that, for instance, and this is a much higher level situation because Houston decided to pay
100%.
Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet, and like those guys are way better than the guys that Detroit got right now. But you hope that having Quentin Grimes and Fontecchio will allow you to evaluate Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson better and let you understand what you have with them and then be able to make decisions off of that more capably.
Yeah, 100%. And I've also said this. I think I understand like people were like, why are the Pistons buyers? Why are they trading off draft capital and stuff like that? My counter to that is you're going to play Cade, Ivy, Duren, Asar, Sasser based off what we've seen. And I think they value Isaiah Stewart. Now, I hope they value him at the position I value him at, but I think they're going to value him one way or another. That's 6 guys already, Sam. You're going to have a top 5 pick. That's 7 guys. What are you going to do with pick number 32 in terms of giving that guy any real playing time anyway? So I understand for the Pistons going and getting a guy who you know exactly what he is and can come in and provide value in the way that you've talked about. Now, could you have got something better with that pick? Maybe that's where the value was wrong, but I don't mind them in general selling off that pick because they only have so many young guys they can give minutes to anyway. Adding an 8th with the pick number 32 didn't make much sense to me. If you tell me there was a better guy out there than Fontecchio to go after, I'll listen to that. But I don't think it's essentially what they did, Sam. They traded back 18 spots in the second round to bring in Fontecchio because they brought in Daniel House into a TPE, waived him, and got a second round pick that's going to be like number 50 or something like that, depending on where the Knicks finish, maybe a little bit later. So they moved back 20 spots in the second round to bring in a wing/forward that makes a lot of sense just in terms of what this roster needed.
Yeah, no, I think it's totally fine. Like, I think that getting Fontecchio is valuable for them. The Celtics, I think the Celtics did great work this week. They got Xavier Tillman. What was that, yesterday?
Yep.
For 2 second-round picks. I mean, Xavier Tillman is perfect on their team. There were teams where Xavier Tillman was not perfect. Teams that don't have just like 5 guys around him that can shoot constantly. But if you have a team with Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford, and you can play those two with Xavier Tillman together, or you can play Luke Cornett with Xavier Tillman, or you can play Tillman at the 5 and have 4 shooters around him. It works perfectly. Like it's truly like the ideal way to use Xavier Tillman because Xavier Tillman is an awesome defensive player. He can slide with bigger wings. He can deal on an island with guards for a few slides. You can have him just like straight physical, like body up. bigger wings for stretches of time in playoff series. And by stretches of time, I mean like 2 minutes at a time, 3 minutes at a time. And those valuable, those minutes add up, I think, with somebody like Tillman, like wearing on you a little bit off the bench. And then he's like a smart rim protector, despite not being very big. His impact on defense is like very, very real, like very substantial. And they have the perfect offensive fit to get the most out of him, either in their bench units surrounding him with like Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, et cetera, or in their starting lineups, or in two big alignments. Like they can really, really do a lot to get the most out of him.
Yeah, and so those second round picks just for, 2027 via the Hawks and a 2030 via the Mavericks is what the Celtics gave up in that deal. So yeah, I think that made a lot of sense. I was a little more interested in the Celtics getting some wing depth. What else did they do? They did bring in Jaden Springer for a 2027 second round pick also to, and then they sent out Delano Banton to the Blazers. I will say, as I was looking at the Grizzlies, not to turn it to the other side, I'm like, man, I wonder what their plan at the 5 is. So I'm just interested. That's not a this year thing. It doesn't really matter. I just wonder long-term kind of what the Grizzlies plan is at the center position.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Grizzlies here momentarily because I think what they did throughout the course of the deadline week is interesting as well. The other deal that the Celtics made was to get Jaden Springer for a 2027 second round pick. Look, Springer has a year and a half left on his rookie scale deal, and we'll see if he can become anything offensively. What I do know is he is very capable on defense as well. And having somebody you can just run out there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, at a time in a playoff series, who can just annoy the shit out of somebody defensively, probably has like some value. You're not going to be able to play him more than 7 or 8 minutes. And honestly, he probably can't play offensively in a playoff series yet. But to do it for a 2027 second, like take a flyer on trying to get him to develop, see if maybe just a different situation helps him. It's an interesting move at the very least, even if I think it's probably not a needle moving move in the same way that like Tillman is.
Sure. I agree with that.
And then they moved Delano Banton to Portland for funsies. We'll go with
one of those second round picks that will never, I guess it could since it's theirs, but yeah.
Yeah, like a bottom 5 second round pick.
Yep.
The Nets. So the Nets basically got off of the Spencer Dinwiddie experience and added Dennis Schroeder and Thad Young. The Raptors then move Spencer Dinwiddie to the buyout market by waiving him. He had a $1.5 million bonus that was going to hit in terms of playing time. So they decide to waive him before he hits that bonus. Look, for the Raptors, they're just getting off of money. They get off the Schroeder money. Smart move for them, given where things are headed for them. For the Nets, they get Spencer Dinwiddie, who can play point guard. And honestly, like could kind of work with Ben Simmons if you're trying to make that work still.
Yeah. So that was Schroeder. Yeah. I think actually makes some sense with the Nets just because they need somebody that can do that. I also felt like I immediately saw Spencer Dinwiddie Lakers buyout conversation. So that like went there as soon as that happened. And then the only other move they made was they kept Dorian Finney-Smith. I know that was a name that was talked a lot about, was Royce O'Neal.
That's right. They traded Royce O'Neal to Phoenix. I want to get to Phoenix now. The Phoenix Suns traded Keita Bates-Diop, Jordan Goodwin, Chimezie Metu, and Yuta Watanabe, as well as 3 second-round picks and a 2030, I'm guessing, first-round pick spot.
So like, I don't have all of the clarification, like where exactly those second round picks. And I'm pretty sure Metu isn't going to the Nets. He's going to this was the one trade I didn't get completely updated and clarification. I just do know the Suns get Royce O'Neal and David Roddy. And those players that you mentioned are the right players, even if I don't have exactly the destinations for them.
Yeah, and look, we don't need to, all due respect to those guys, we don't need to spend a crazy amount of time on them. The big part of this is that the Suns are getting Royce O'Neal, who's like a good, valuable defensive wing, which is something they could use, and David Roddy, as well as like opening 2 roster spots for the buyout market, which for them a little bit limited because they are over the second apron and can't go and get what's the word I'm looking for? Guys over $12.5 million that get bought out. But I like the additions for Phoenix. I think that these were the kind of additions that make sense. They end up keeping the Nasir Little deal, which is like really their only intermediate deal moving forward now beyond Yusuf Nurkic, who's kind of been essential for them this year. I get what the Suns are doing here. Like, I don't think David Roddy can really play playoff minutes at this point, but I will say that like the intel on David Roddy is like, he's a crazy hard worker and that he is like really committed and like a really good like team guy and like a high character guy. Maybe they can make that into something in Phoenix that's valuable, and they need like a bigger bodied 4. I bet you he plays playoff minutes. It's just how impactful they are. The second piece of it though is Royce O'Neal, and that's really the main piece. Royce O'Neal will be valuable for them in the playoffs.
Yes, and say like, I mean, we talked about this. Like, who are the targets? What do they have to give up to get that target? Like all of that. Like this team is in win now. Like you have to go for it with this roster. And now you have Royce O'Neal coming off the bench with Eric Gordon, and so you got a little bit more juice there. And then like if nothing else, maybe Roddy eats up some regular season minutes. It seems like they've been just filtering guys in and out, trying different players and combinations in terms of their off the bench. Like Roddy's at least a guy that you can play at the 3-4 and he can eat up minutes for the next couple months on their way to the playoffs. And then even if you have to really condense down the lineup in the playoffs, I think that still provides a little bit of value. And then again, like you said, if he's a really hard worker and he gets better, he's on he's a couple more years on a pretty good contract if that's a part of your rotation. So I think for me, it makes sense.
It does make a bit of sense. Let's see here. Where do we want to go? The Pelicans end up not really doing anything. Did we go through the Grizzlies is who we wanted to talk about, I guess. That could be maybe where we finish on this. I mean, the Spurs like got Marcus Morris in a second round pick for Doug McDermott. Morris will probably be bought out. The Blazers got Delano Banton. I don't really need to like dive into Delano Banton. The Warriors, we talked about the Warriors bit, but they did like $8 million worth of tax avoidance by moving Corey Joseph.
The Rockets kept Jayshawn Tate. Like that was a name that we talked a lot about. So I think we should at least mention it, and like nothing to dive in there, but it was interesting.
Yeah, the Rockets keep Jayshawn Tate. I mean, the Clippers, they did that thing with Ish Kamagate. We talked about the Timberwolves. We talked about the Kings really only getting Robin Lopez, and we'll see if he sticks there. And any other deals? Did we miss anything else before we get to the Grizzlies? I don't
think so. I'll scour again while you start on the Grizzlies.
So the Grizzlies are going to get they waived Victor Oladipo already, but they got 4 Steven Adams, Victor Oladipo, 3 second-round picks. 2 of those picks might actually end up being pretty valuable. I think this was like a totally reasonable deal. The Grizzlies really needed to minimize their luxury tax situation next season. They had to move one of Adams or Kennard. I think a lot of people thought it'd be Kennard, but at the end of the day, the Rockets were willing to do Adams. They were involved in that Celtics Tillman deal. They get 2 extra second round picks that way. And then they get this, what's assumed to be a 2030 first round pick swap with the Suns. I think they now own 2 pick swaps with the Suns after having gotten one last summer as well.
I saw somebody that covers the Suns bring that up. Like they acted confused because they felt like they already had the pick swap that was being talked about. So that's one that I assume will get, is either being cleared up as we're recording here, or will, get cleared up over the next day or so.
Yeah. Like basically the Grizzlies had to have gotten something here for David Roddy. I would have imagined they got something. I don't know if they got a 2030 first round pick swap for David Roddy, but I'll take a look while you're talking. Maybe I think the Grizzlies did well here to like open up flexibility for the summer, and they get a bunch of draft picks that, if they hit on one of these 6 second round picks that they've got or whatever, then it's probably a win.
Yeah, I mean, at some point they had to take some of these young players and recycle them into something else. Oladipo was waived. That came out this afternoon as well. So I think you talked about all of the second round picks they were able to get in that deal for Steven Adams, which was 3 of them, a couple in this draft. They hit 2 more in the Tillman deal. We just talked about that with the Celtics. And then whatever they end up getting in this deal that sent out David Roddy and Royce O'Neal and all of that to the Suns. They did get Yuta Watanabe. And I think Sam Chimezie Metu ended up with Memphis in this deal as well. Again, this was the one deal where I didn't have everything solidified.
Yeah, it looks like they do get Metu. Yeah, I don't know what else they got here. A pick swap back to the Grizzlies. The Suns are sending Yuta Watanabe and a pick swap back to the Grizzlies. Yeah, okay. Sure. Let's go nuts. Like if they got another pick swap, that'd be like the second pick swap I believe they have with Phoenix, for what it's worth.
Yeah, like I said, I saw a Suns content creator that was a little confused by that. So that's definitely one that, here later this evening, tomorrow, whatever, I want to get into a little bit more exactly what the moving parts and all of that was.
Yeah, I'll try and do some actual due diligence on this and call some people and figure out what's happening. Or I'll just ask Hollinger, because Hollinger probably knows. Shout out John Hollinger. Just a great human being that helps me every day. Okay. That's all we got. Any big takeaways here? We're at the 2-hour mark. I think that's normal for a deadline episode. We're at the 2-hour mark.
I was expecting that. I will say, we didn't, we opened the show with this, Sam. What was the biggest name move today? And we both said Bojan. I saw some people put PJ Washington. I saw even a Gordon Hayward. Like, the fact that those are the names that we're talking about as the biggest kind of speaks to this deadline was what we thought in terms of big names. But man, there was a lot of action today. It was hot and heavy there for a while. And so I think it still was, a deadline with a lot of movement, a lot of action. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to look back and go, what was the move that really made an impact maybe on this year or a year from now, any of that stuff. And so it was still a lot of moves. I wonder what ends up being the most impactful.
Well, and the big thing is that all of it happened early this year, right? Like James Harden got traded in the first week or second week of the season. Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, the Raptors did their work early. Terry Rozier went, early, pre-deadline week, right? There are typically pre-deadline deals. It does feel like they are typically not that substantial necessarily. I would imagine that if we look through trade deadline, in-season trades in general, this was probably a fairly active season from a big name perspective, given that 2 all-NBA players got moved in James Harden and Pascal Siakam. But over the last week here, it did feel a little bit dead. As we talked about, teams, had been contacting me basically saying this is pretty dead right now. So we'll see where it goes. I'm excited to see what happens with this title race, because it did feel pretty open for the taking, and a lot of the teams near the top didn't necessarily make big moves. Like Boston added on the margins. The Knicks, added more substantially. The 76ers added a little bit, and we'll see if they're even in the title race. The Bucks very, very lightly added on the margins. The Cavs
didn't do anything.
Literally did nothing. The Thunder made a fairly substantial move. Nuggets didn't do anything. Timberwolves added very much on the margins with a guy that probably doesn't help them in the playoffs. The Clippers, they didn't really do anything outside of the Harden deal in the second week. The Suns added, a potential starter in Royce O'Neal. The Kings didn't really do anything. The Pelicans didn't do much. The Mavs are the one that made the attempted kind of big move, it feels like, and we'll see if it's worthwhile.
Yeah. I mean, the Knicks truly, as you go through that, they made the biggest move. You know, so we started off with that, and it makes complete sense because they were the ones that, I mean, they didn't, and that's what's crazy. Like we round back here, and we can close it out with this, I guess, is they made the biggest moves and they still kept all of their flexibility, right? They still have plenty of flexibility moving forward, even with the moves they made, even with the move they made a few weeks ago with OG. So well done to the Knicks.
Yeah, I think the Knicks did great here. That's all we've got on today's episode with our beautiful new branding, which will be here hopefully every episode moving
Shout
forward.
Out Dave.
Shout out to Dave. Okay, that's all we've got. Bryce, tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people what's up.
Yeah, at Motor City Hoops on Twitter. Follow there for any content, Pistons, NBA draft, NBA. And if you happen to be a Pistons fan, not already listening, the Pistons Pulse, we recorded live right before I came on here. So that'll be out on, podcast, or you can go watch on YouTube. As always, had a blast, Sam. Shout out Dave for all of the new stuff. Very cool, very exciting. Lots of really cool stuff going on.
Yep. Really excited that we were able to do this. Go to The Athletic. I'm going to have some things up, probably like scouting some of these deals. I'll probably do PJ in Dallas because I find his fit interesting. I will probably do Quentin Grimes, I would guess, because I find his whole situation interesting. And who else? We'll see who else I end up doing over the course of the next couple of days. That's all I've got, though. Until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.